Steve and Meade again, back with another Bullseye Guy podcast. Super excited today to have Joshua with us. Joshua and I met years ago back when the world was open with AIBC and things along that line. And Malta's really been at the forefront. We've done a lot of work there. Obviously, we created something years ago I call the 5 Pillars of Malta. And there's some of the things that we looked at that Joshua's been heavily involved in. Again, so super excited, great background, everything from education to AI to blockchain to European Commission, and we're going to cover it all. So introduction, Joshua, tell us about yourself.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. So I am, primarily a computer scientist. For the past 10 to 12 years, I've been working on researching how to develop systems, particularly for Internet of Things types of devices. So really small devices that are working in the background. And then I got into blockchain, mainly because of my interest in computer science, a particular area. And Malta announced it was going to become the blockchain island.
Right.
Now, whether it should be the blockchain island or the innovation island, that was a conversation we're just having right now, Stephen. And then I got into regulation as well throughout this whole weird path. So I'm somewhere between a computer scientist, a researcher, and a legislator.
Yeah, so let's go down. I'm going to cover these in sort of stages because, again, one of the pillars when I looked at Malta was, again, and like you said, you and I were joking, blockchain's a big component. I think blockchain to me is not, and I say this, it's not an industry, it's a technology that funnels into industry. So blockchain will run AI, it'll run finance and fintech and banking. So the concept of being an innovation island, I've always been a big component of. But at a base level, Malta was always interesting to me because it's an English-speaking language in the European Union. But let's start with education. Malta's got a really unique program around blockchain and innovation and things like that. Talk to us about Malta University, and then let's move to the MDIA.
Yep. So when we started looking into the laws, we were sitting around the table, lawyers, techies, and finance professionals, and we noticed that there's a disconnect between the different professions. And a colleague and myself, Professor Gordon Potch, we said, we really need to start thinking about educational programs that aren't focused purely on our own disciplines, but we're also looking at the peripheral disciplines. So we developed this master's in blockchain and DLT. And it takes in students from these different main disciplines, computer science, business and finance, and law and regulation. And we provide a broad introduction to the area of blockchain and then introduction to the fields that students are not acquainted with. So for example, our lawyers and our business professionals learn how to program smart contracts from scratch. Our techies learn about the law. And then we dig deeper into each of the disciplines' area of specialization. So this was really the unique slant that we took in Malta. And we've been running for 2 years now. And we're getting quite interesting uptake. I mean, we're getting students from all the different disciplines. And so, I mean, a lot of the students are saying, wow, we never really understood that coding would look like this. I mean, from the non-computer scientists. And it's really opening up the various different students' mindset on how they can integrate all together in their different disciplines. So that's the idea. Can we create an ecosystem from these different disciplines at the end of the program working together? And that's what we hope to see develop further.
Yeah, and it's been amazing because, again, I looked at jurisdictions around the world, and that one of those pillars for Malta for me was not only the education side, but the fact that it is in English. And you said that, like, you know, we've got our attorneys that are there English, the bankers, the contracts, but you also did something unique across not only the education side, but into the government side of trying to standardize languaging. And you know, if you create language and terminology, it makes all the components work better together.
Yeah, that's right. So Malta's national language is Maltese, but both Maltese and English are official languages. And actually, when we were sitting down on one of the blockchain laws, we were deciding which language should prevail in a court of law. For example, if you come with a smart contract and it's not doing what it should be doing, should English prevail in a court of law? Should we consider that Maltese also prevails? Yeah. But really, when we sat down, we said, who in the world conducts business in Maltese? So we said, you know what, let's stick to English as prevailing. And if you use other languages like Maltese, that's perfectly fine. But really, it's English that we're using nowadays.
Yeah, and you said something that I like, because I joke with people. They say, "Oh, Stephen, are you a blockchain company?" And I joke, I say, "There's no such thing as a blockchain company any more than there's an internet company."
Exactly.
And people don't know how the internet works. The internet works on programming and language. And that's
Right.
what you were saying, is the language, the programming, the coding is the critical component regardless of what industry.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not even about blockchain, right? And what we're trying to really get out from these types of services is decentralization. It's not really a technology thing. It's more of a social dilemma. Do we trust our central service providers, or do we want to remove some of them? And I think that's the key that we have to start asking. And I think that's what we're starting to see with Bitcoin taking off, and even the latest GME pump.
Yeah,
So I think now we're starting to question certain central powers, and I think that's
absolutely.
really interesting.
And so I'm going to make one more comment, and then I want to transition to the MDIA, because we were, involved in that since 2018. Fascinating. We don't call ourselves a blockchain company anymore. I say we use enterprise DLT. And it's funny, you mentioned blockchain and DLT, the distributed ledger technology. So I think there's going to start being distinctions. For us, we're using enterprise DLT, which separates us from cryptocurrency and tokens. And those distinctions are eventually going to start coming in. And again, I think that's where Malta's done a really good job with terminology and focus and things like that. Let's move forward on the MDIA. Talk to us. Tell me what the MDIA is. I know what it is, but share with us what it is, what it stands for, and what it does. And then I'll tell you why that was one of our pillars when we looked at Malta.
Definitely. So the Malta Digital Innovation Authority, the MDIA, is in inverted commas about regulating technology. But I wouldn't say that without explaining it further, because we don't tell people what they can and they cannot do using technology. So when we started to think about blockchain and certain perils of using blockchain, we started to wonder, how can we allow for smart contracts to execute that out there and potentially have a bug in them and lose money for the different users out there, potentially breaking a law and continue to break a law. So we noticed that there are certain types of sectors, certain industries that need more levels of technology assurance on the software. So if you're running a cryptocurrency or some sort of ICO and raising millions, billions of euros worth, you need to provide to your stakeholders assurances that your code is fit for purpose. Why? Because if there's a bug, you cannot fix that bug. So it's really important to have those assurances in place. And that is what the MDIA is really about. It's about providing assurance framework that can, so it's voluntary, that can be used if required. But then our financial authority mandates that an audit from our authority is undertaken. So where it is required, for example, in an ICO, a crypto company, can be mandated. In future, if there are health systems that lives depend on certain technology, they can mandate an MDIA assurance audit. So that's really the balance that we find. Only apply audits and assurances where required.
Yeah, and let's talk about blockchain and crypto first, and then AI. So Malta, MDIA is the Malta Digital Innovation Authority. That's the actual agency. And Malta, again, was fascinating. We tried to overlay it with the US, but Malta has these authorities and CEOs that run them, and they're autonomous, but they're not. But again, the MDIA, the financial authority, the terminology across was very similar. So the agencies actually work together. And again, I love positioning. I kept joking with the guys years ago. I said, don't call it regulation. Call it, it's a framework. It's a framework of innovation, but that framework provides guidance and compliance and regulation. But let's not call it regulation. Let's call it a framework to fit under. And that's really what the MDI has done, is created that framework for companies to move forward.
That's it. Spot on. I mean, I often say that we are regulating technology, but I'm opposing mandatory regulation. Only implement any assurances or regulation as such where required, because otherwise we'll stifle innovation, and that's not what we want to achieve.
Yeah, and I use a term, Joshua, called retrospective evolution, which means how do we look backwards at things that worked or didn't work and evolve into the future. And I'm going to transition in this by explaining again, when I looked at Malta, we looked at Bahama and Bermudas and Singapore. Malta to me was fascinating because you've been there first as a country with gaming and gambling, a lot of things in the internet that you were not only at the forefront of, there were some mistakes made. I mean, Malta's had some challenges, which I don't know that are always a bad thing if you learn from them. And in some of the meetings, the MDIA was really saying, hey, let's look at what's worked in the past, but let's be better moving forward. So
That's
what
right.
are some of the changes you think you've done from the prior, iteration of Malta around gambling and gaming?
Yep. So I kind of see these sorts of changes like a pendulum. So when gaming started off, it started not in an unregulated environment, but it really allowed for the sector to grow as required. And it started implementing more regulation as it saw the requirement for it. And when MDIA started, we were at the phase where we're saying, you know what, we need to really implement a robust framework over here. And we started with a framework that was quite onerous in regards to the MDIA. And over time, we started to realize, okay, there's a number of ICO crypto which fall under our VFA regime, but there's a number of other companies out there, startups, that don't particularly fit into the full audit framework that we've created. And we need to create something now going back to the other end with less regulation. So any week now, we're going to launch our sandbox. And the idea behind it is to have a similar assurance framework, but with less controls that allow for startups to fit into the sandbox and slowly grow and get its way out of it. So obviously, we've gone to one extreme. Now we're going back to be a bit more lenient, and we're just going to find the balance to see where the market allows for that to be.
Good. And you dropped an acronym in there that, again, is in your head. The audience may not know, but I do, because we're a qualified VFA. So again, what Malta did is didn't call it cryptos or token. They called it the VFA as a
virtual financial asset.
Virtual financial asset. So again, that terminology is, what's a VFA, that virtual financial asset? How do you create a framework around it? Like for us, we could have gone straight to market, but we wanted to go through the VFA qualification process to be a more legitimate project. And I think that's where Malta has a role to play, especially moving forward. You mentioned GameStop, you mentioned, Robinhood, and these things are these centralized exchanges. Malta's got GBX and some other things that are interesting, but where do you see the change just in the last 15 to 18 months? And where do you see Malta playing in the next 15 to 18 months moving forward? Because the GameStop, Robinhood, decentralized, there's some inflection points that have happened in just the last 30 or 60 days.
That's right. So I would say Malta, after providing regulation in the space, we've now started to see some successes. The Financial Authority has announced a number of in-principle approvals, and now we're starting to see more interest in coming back to Malta, because people are starting to see, wow, Malta's making progress. So that's great to see. At the same time, we are aware that the Maltese framework will not stand as an island on its own for long. I mean, we are working on the MiCA, DLT, DORA framework, which the European Union is proposing to harmonize across Europe. So we are working together as one of the member states to assure that we have harmonized legislation. So over the next 2 years, we'll see more efforts, and hopefully within 2 years, we will see a harmonized regulatory framework, which will allow people to work across Europe without problems. Now, one interesting thing regarding the whole decentralization movement is people are starting to realize they don't necessarily need to trust these old institutions. And I think this is where we're going to start seeing different powers pulling in different directions, and those who want a regulated space and those who don't want a regulated space. Now, most people out there who are not familiar with crypto and blockchain, would they actually invest in crypto? I think those particular individuals need a regulated entity, need some stamp of approval for allowing them to jump in to actually, for us to get a mass adoption. And I think that when that actually happens, that is an interesting time, because then people can decide whether they do want cryptocurrencies in the traditional sense that are decentralized, or eventually to adopt central bank digital currencies, which are more centralized. And it's more of a social issue than a technological issue. And I think that's going to be a very interesting time. I'm not sure what part Malta is going to play yet in this, but I do hope we'll be playing some pivotal parts.
Yeah, and I actually look at everything with me as 3 or 5. So the 3 for us was, I've had 3 public companies in the US, what are called microcap, OTC. They're technically called penny stocks.
Yep.
You buy a 10-cent penny stock. not because you think you have equity. If the company goes under, you don't have any equity protection. It's highly volatile, but you buy a 10-cent stock hoping it goes to $1.
Yeah.
But at that lower level, there's very little jurisdiction and regulation and audits, but you've got that big movement. And that's where we were interested. What we did with Malta was we wanted to be a qualified VFA. Yeah. But the benefit of the decentralized is, unlike a US exchange where you have to go through listing and a lot of steps and the decentralized platforms that are coming out, you can list tokens directly right now with nobody's permission. You need to run your market maker. You need to get velocity. But I think that's where Malta could be interested, is playing the hybrid between a legitimate crypto company, whether it's ours at Meade or somebody said, hey, we want to be under a regulation and a framework, but we want the freedom and autonomy to go direct to the public. That's where I see this going, that I find fascinating.
Yeah, so when you think about smart contracts and the fact that the code is out there and everyone as such can verify that it does what it's supposed to do, some people are saying in certain industries, do you really need a regulator? If you can see the code and it's public, it's going to do exactly what it says to do. Do I really need a regulator to tell me that it's fine to use? And I think this is an interesting part that we're going to now see at play, whether we can remove some regulation because of certain guarantees provided by smart contracts and blockchain, and how much regulation, how much stamp of approval from regulators do we need to build trust amongst our different users. So there has been some work. Dr. Max Ganado is working on
Max is great. Love Max.
The DITO, so the decentralized autonomous.
Yeah, we like Max. We like Ian in the Colito group.
Exactly. So the idea behind the DITO is to create this legal entity adequate to host a decentralized autonomous organization. And we've talked about this in the past, and perhaps this will become a future piece that we'll look into as the sector grows.
Yes, so, and that's again where I look at retrospective evolution. In the US, you've got the OTC penny stock, the micro caps, which are highly volatile, highly speculative, as are a lot of crypto projects. But you have a layer called pink, which is the unaudited. There's very little rules, but as that company grows and matures, you go into an audit where there's a little more structure around it and validity. And again, that's what we found fascinating with Malta. We wanted that validity of the audit, but the freedom and flexibility to go into multiple jurisdictions and raise capital and be direct to our consumer. And that's where I think the industry's going, where Malta could still play a big role.
Definitely. I mean, especially with where these, so we're seeing stocks that we used to believe are not just based upon perception. And yet now we are seeing that even the ones that we thought were not based on perception, it is at the end of the day.
They're almost all emotion and perception. Until they're big, the bigger stocks go on. Well, the old legacy guys will look at P&E and profit and revenue and projections. The GameStop sort of broke that. And here's a bunch of emotional guys who either wanted to manipulate or just said, hey, we want to support it. But yeah, there's new technologies and fun things coming out. Quick question on Malta, and then I want to move to AI and then some of the European Commission. One of the big problems that's finally catching up, the fifth pillar for us in Malta was banking and custody and things like that. And Malta sort of started moving in, and then they backed away. And now there's, in the US and internationally, there's more financial institutions coming on for custody. And let me explain it real quick, because it's not the retail guy that's got 1,000 or 10,000 in Bitcoin. It's the company that might use, the virtual financial asset to raise 10 or $15 million as funding. That capital that they've raised has to go into a bank with custody and things like that. Where's Malta now in that custody side of the equation? Because that's still missing. More companies are coming on, but I think that's the fifth pillar that needs to be finalized.
Yeah, so I'm not the best person to answer that. The financial authority would have more insight on that. That being said, I am aware of the operators who are operating in Malta being able to acquire the services that they couldn't previously acquire. So it does seem like there has been movement, but I wouldn't be the right person to
Then let's stay along the MDIA and innovation. Let's move a little bit to AI. We don't have to stay in the blockchain crypto side because, again, the innovation not only of the AI, but even IoT. I think IoT, the Internet of Things, overlapping onto blockchain to write onto smart contracts, food security, art, like all of this sort of comes together under innovation. What's your interest in AI? Where does Malta fit in AI in terms of the university and the MDIA?
Yeah, so the university does have a master's and also an undergraduate program in artificial intelligence. And we have a number of academics specializing in it. But when we look at Malta as a player in the AI space, we have to be realistic. Of many other countries, larger countries with much larger budgets have been working in AI for decades longer than us. So if we really want to place ourselves there, should we aim to be working at the cutting edge and advancing AI at the cutting edge, or should we try to see what distinct features does Malta have and how can we place Malta in this space? So Malta's small. In Malta, we can move quickly. Where the AI task force saw that Malta could actually have this distinct part to play is by allowing for Malta to be a test bed. Do you have a great idea that you need to test out amongst a whole country, quite a large population who is also tech savvy? Malta can be that place. You could come to Malta, deploy your software, get any early feedback, and then go to the rest of the world. So that's one particular part to it. The second part is regulation. And we're very quick at getting regulation in place to, again, test particular products. And from the MDIA, we've extended our remit from looking at blockchain, smart contracts, and DLT to also include AI. So now if you have some solution and you want to build assurances that it's doing what it should be doing, you can come to the AI. And that's really good because on blockchain and DLT, you have the problem that if there's a bug, it'll do that bug forever. Now in AI, you have a different problem. You have software that you can update, but even when you update, you don't really know what it's going to choose because you don't know what it learned. So I would say this is really the role that Malta can play in this big grand scheme of things. Come to Malta, test out your software here. I wouldn't say we're the guinea pigs, but we're a tech savvy population that can help you get the right results.
Let me help you on that one, Joshua, and dig a little deeper because it's something we've tried to do in the US for years. It's what I call the P5. You know, can you partner, pilot, prototype, purchase, or promote?
That's right.
And if you're building something that's AI around, medical for something that, is there a certain vaccine? Is there a certain, disease? Is there something education related? Malta's got a very interesting mindset and access to guys like you, which thank you again, where they're willing to kind of potentially be a pilot customer on some new technology or to prototype something or find a way to partner. And if you're a company looking to get into not only globally, but the EU, Malta's a fascinating opportunity because if you can pilot something in medical AI or blockchain smart contracts for real estate, that could roll out globally because you have that first customer, that first pilot. And again, that was one of the 5 pillars for us was Malta's mindset is, hey, we're willing to try some of these things and partner with people.
Yeah, I mean, having this database of what a Maltese person is and how to test on the Maltese people and get the right results, all you have to do is then remove the Maltese characteristics and fit in the other characteristics. So that's why it's really good to test on Malta. And there is a particular project, but I don't want to mention a particular project that is looking into this at this particular point, which is great.
Yeah, so that partner, pilot, prototype, opportunity, you don't get that in a lot of other countries. Either they don't have that innovation mindset or the access, or they aren't so technology focused. And again, that's what was always interesting. And then you're doing it in English, so all the things kind of cross together. Let's finish up on this section, then we'll move to the European Congress. What do you see as some of the biggest advantages in the next 15 to 18 months in let's try and converge them, everything between DLT, AI, but even in Malta, if you were to say, hey, come to Malta in the next 15 months, we think this is what's going to happen. Talk to us about why people should either come there or come back. Like we never left other than COVID, but why should they come to Malta?
That's right. So, like I said, we're starting to see approvals being made. We're starting to see the ecosystem taking off. We have companies who are operating here. We have companies looking for talent. We have our master students who are now looking for jobs.
Yep.
So we're really starting to focus on creating this ecosystem. Now, besides Malta being a brilliant place to live, I think over the next 2 years, and it's not just Malta, but with the central, the ECB proposing a central bank digital currency, I think we will start to see really cool applications being deployed very fast. So imagine overnight, we just have access to CBDC currency, whatever that will be, and we can start writing applications for it. Where would be a greater place to create these applications than a place like Malta that can literally roll them out overnight or over a few weeks? So I think once CBDCs get out there, it's going to be quite an interesting playing field. Obviously, there's the whole ethos of centralized currencies versus decentralized, definitely, but it's still going to be an interesting time to see how can we use these different currencies.
Yeah, and like I said, with Malta making mistakes before, correcting them this time, building digital sandboxes, you know, the banking of the world started in Malta, the center of trade. Like there's a lot of great things in the story of Malta as an island, which I'm excited about for you guys, and hopefully we can continue to participate in. You also recently, and I don't know how recently, I think it's recently, moved over to some stuff on the European Commission. Can you talk about what that is and your role and what they do?
Yep. So I can't go too much into detail on what it is that I'll be doing, but I will be evaluating projects and tenders for the European Commission. And the idea behind it is that if Europe wants a particular project done, whether it's a commercial project or whether it's a research project, how do they make sure that they're getting the right projects in place and the right bids in place? So we're a group of experts who have been appointed to evaluate these different projects. And within the span of a year or two, we should start to see a few of them going live. So I can't really go too much into detail on the exact tasks, but I think we'll start to see some very interesting projects being promoted soon.
All right, so we won't ask you exact, we'll ask you broad generalities. What do you think are some of the 2 or 3 types of projects that the European Commission would be interested in? How about that?
Yeah, that I wouldn't mind because it's not too specific in and of itself.
It's more theory of what you think they might be interested in that would be of interest to the European Commission.
So I would say what I believe Europe really needs to see in regards to applications is one of the toughest ones to implement. A self-sovereign identity solution where now we're on a blockchain. Now I am an individual with an identity on a blockchain. Yep. Once you have that, then the whole world opens up for all types of different applications. And we've seen a number of different educational certificates being proposed, which is a great place to start because you don't have to worry about crypto to just notarize some certificates. So personally, I would start with the basics. Get an identity on the blockchain, get educational certificates on the blockchain, then start expanding into other areas of just notarizing documents. Then we can get into the more advanced ones. Now, this is really, we have to have the first step to get here. It would really be interesting to see processes like rental contracts on the blockchain, which is something that Malta started. We've put a notarized hash of a rental contract. But
rental contracts, some of the real estate stuff Malta was doing, some of the onboarding, legal formation, exactly. Like there's some interesting things.
But now the next step, which will be very interesting, is to automate processes. So not just notarizing, can I automate the tendering process? And if I have won a bid, I can't extend that bid unless there's some logic in the smart contract allowing me to. I think these processes then will provide governments with complete transparency, and we won't ever have to question our government because the government will almost be implemented in code parts of it. Short answer, the basics, self-sovereign identity, start with that.
And in your mind, Joshua, what technology acronym would that fall under? Blockchain, DLT, distributed ledger technology, smart contracts? The smart contracts are on blockchain. Like, where do you think that wording will fall for that kind of project?
My current guess is it would be DLT. One of the issues is that with EU being made up of many states, will it be a single decentralized system, or will there be a number of centralized systems working together? I'm not sure that would fall under DLT, but I would hope that it would. But again, let's forget the DLT blockchain. It's innovation. We have a particular problem, and then we use the right tools for the job.
All right, so wrapping up, and this is an odd question because I don't know in your position, but what are the, you know, one or two biggest things you're working on the next 6 to 9 months that myself or somebody within our audience might be able to help you with?
So I'm working on a research project where I'm trying to focus on some blockchain-based problems that we've, for the longest amount of time, have been saying it's not doable. I'd like to question whether certain things are doable or not. So I'd like to dig in deep into the fundamental assumptions that are being made.
I'm going to have to teach you some of my bullseye sales techniques to get a little more specific.
So one particular area I want to look into is interoperability. I don't think we've been doing it right yet, and I want to focus more on interoperability. Very
cool. All right. We're going to wrap up. I'm going to keep us on time. I appreciate all your efforts, everything you're doing. You know, I love the innovation side of Malta. The fact that you've moved over to the European Commission, I think, is really fascinating and exciting. So big congrats on that. Wrapping up, Stephen Meade, the Bullseye Guy. We'll be back again next week.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks.